Okay, so let's open up our code if it's not open already by clicking on the code toggle button and start to think about how can we change this into a single function so that we can reuse it and limit the amount of code we have. You might be asking, why do we have to make this shorter? Well, right now, every time we want one single light to light up, we have to write 4 lines of code. That's quite a bit. If you think about having to, like, let's say, light up 100 of these in a row through some kind of weird timing mechanism, you would have to have a lot of code to turn these lights on and off. So this is where a function comes in handy. It allows us to create a reusable piece of code that can serve a single purpose. So we're going to come down here to the end of our code, and after line 22, we're going to hit enter a couple times, and we're going to start a new function. This function is going to do something. It's going to take in an argument, but it's not going to return any values. So we're just going to start it off with the keyword void, and then we're going to call it light LED. We are going to use 2 brackets, and inside that bracket, we're going to pass in an argument, a variable. The argument or variable is going to be a pin. You'll notice that these pins are integers, 13, 12, and 11. So that means the value that I'm passing in as an argument is going to be an int or an integer, int, and I'm just going to call that pin, just for frame of reference for myself. So we're going to pass in a value of pin. We're then going to open a bracket, okay, our curly brace, and then we're going to close our curly brace and bring it down a line so we have some space to write our code block. And we're going to look at what can this look like. So we're going to copy 4 lines of code. Okay, you can copy these 4 or the top 4, it doesn't matter. And we're going to paste those into our function because we know this code works. And this is a great way to play around with code when you're first starting to learn out how to code. You can copy and paste things and play around with it and see if you can get it to work. Because at the end of the day, if you break it, it's just some written text in a digital environment, a browser. You're literally not going to break anything. So we don't want to hard code this number anymore. We don't want to have to say digital write 13, digital write 12, digital write 11. Instead, we want to just pass in a variable. And that variable is going to fit in right here. So let's call it pin. And you'll notice that I wrote it exactly the same as I have it written here. Okay, that's very important. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of this 11 as well. And you know what? I think it's beneficial here if we actually pass in a second argument. So let's go comma, and we'll pass in another int called time. And that's going to be our delay. So rather than delaying for 1,000 seconds, let's change that to time. We used variables in block-based coding, but just as a refresher, what's going to happen here is when I pass in a value for pin, anywhere in my functional code that has pin in this function is going to get replaced with the value I passed in. The same with time. So let's look at how that looks in our actual code. So let's get rid of what's in our loop. And now we're just going to do a simple function call. Again, something you've done in block-based coding, but this time we have to write it. So our function is called light LED. So let's go light LED. And then we're going to open and close our brackets and end with a semicolon. That's the equivalent of a period. Okay, so inside this bracket, it can pass in 2 arguments. We can pass the first argument of the pin number and the second argument of time. So let's go ahead and pass in pin 13, which is our first pin. Okay, so pin 13, and let's run it for 1,000 milliseconds. So what this is going to do, it's going to call the function light LED, which is this here. It's going to pass in pin 13, so that pin is now 13, this is now 13, this is now 13, and it's going to pass in the value of 1,000 for time, time, and time. And then we're going to hit start simulation, just make sure it works at least once. So does this light light up? It does. It turns on and off. That's great. So let's stop our simulation and think about how do we get this to work for our other 2 lights. Well, it's pretty simple. We just copy this, the function call, sorry, and we just put it in twice. And rather than passing in pin 13, we'll pass in pin 12, and then we'll pass in pin 11. Okay, so 13, 12, and 11. And because our delay statements are built directly into light LED, I can just write my code simply like this. And I can hit start simulation, and we'll notice that light 1, light 2, light 3. Okay, so that's not bad. So an extension for you to think about is how can you light these lights up so that maybe pin 13 lights up first, followed by pin 11, followed by pin 12. What would you have to do here in your functional loop? And then what could you also do to create some kind of pattern that's not just left to right? Could you go right to left? Could you add more LEDs and have them sort of all flashing together or at different times? So go ahead, try to push your learning, extend your learning, and just play around with this for a few before you move on to the next video to make sure you really understand the idea of what this function does and how we do function calls in our loop.